Hello London, we are ready for your vote.
Hello, I'm Stephen Perkins, and this is Douze Points, the Eurovision podcast from the team behind Binge Watch. It is Monday, 21st of October, and this is part 2 of my deep dive into the 1993 edition of the Eurovision Song Contest. In our previous episode, I took a look at Kwalifikacja za Millstreet, the very first Eurovision pre-qualifying round, in which 7 countries competed for the right to make their Eurovision debut that year, with Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Croatia ultimately qualifying through to the main event. And in this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at that main 1993 contest, which was a ground-shifting moment for Eurovision on a number of levels. Following Linda Martin's win in Malmö in 1992 with Why Me, Ireland were preparing to host Eurovision for the 4th time. All 3 previous occasions, 1971, 1981 and 1988, had been located in Dublin, so the assumption was that the nation's capital would play host once again. However, somebody had other plans. According to legend, Linda Martin hadn't even finished her encore before Noel C. Duggan, owner of the Green Glens Equestrian Centre in Millstreet, County Cork, a small town with a population of around 1,500 people at the time, had already started work on a pitch to broadcaster RTE that his property would be the perfect venue to host the 1993 contest. It was a tempting proposal, largely because he was offering the use of the venue itself for free, as well as the fact that he'd managed to get significant buy-in from the local community and investments from local businesses to help take some of the financial pressure away from the broadcaster itself. As it happened, RTE were keen on the idea of hosting the contest outside the capital this time around, and after surveying various locations, Millstreet was confirmed as the host town for Eurovision 1993, making it, at the time, the most westerly settlement to host Eurovision, until Lisbon in 2018. This was a bold proposition. Millstreet was then, and still is, the smallest town ever to host the Eurovision Song Contest, and given the way that the scale of the contest has swelled in recent years, it seems unlikely to ever lose that honour. The arena had a substantial capacity of around 3,500 people, but that didn't stop this unexpectedly rural spot from being the target of some derision, most notably from the BBC's Nicholas Witchell, who asked Noel Duggan why Eurovision was being held in a cowshed in Ireland. Duggan responded by telling him that it was, in fact, a horse shed. That said, there were some logistical problems that did need to be dealt with. For starters, Millstreet was remote, properly remote. There were no motorways leading to it, the nearest airport was over 60 kilometres away in Cork, even the train station was in need of an upgrade. There definitely wasn't the infrastructure to provide accommodation for all the international delegates, although that one was fairly easily solved by using what was on hand in Killarney and other nearby towns. Heck, even Green Glens itself needed some work done. It turned out the roof was too low to accommodate the stage, which meant that the floor had to be dug out and lowered in order to fit the stage and the audience seating in, and its communications capabilities needed some improvement to be able to handle the rigours of a live international broadcast with jurors from all across Europe calling in to give those all-important scores. And yet, it all worked beautifully on the night. If you watch Eurovision 1993 now, there is nothing about that broadcast that feels pedestrian or small-scale. The stage looks high quality, there are no major technical slips, and when the camera pans around the audience, that place feels enormous. It's genuinely a tribute to everyone involved that the whole thing feels utterly convincing at every turn. The scene is set for the evening with an opening animation sequence based around Celtic mythology, which features what I would consider to be pretty decent VFX for 1993, before some beautiful aerial shots, reminding us just how small Millstreet actually is, bring us over to the night's arena as Davy Spillane plays the Hillen pipes, before we're introduced to our host for the evening, Fionnuala Sweeney, aged 28 at the time, who's cool and composed throughout the evening, but with the warmth and humour that you need from a top-tier Eurovision host. Fionnuala welcomes us to the biggest Eurovision to date, with 25 countries taking part in the smallest town so far. As she welcomes the 3 new countries to the contest, it's worth noting as well that the opening up of the contest further into Eastern Europe adds a very topical element to the event, particularly with Bosnia-Herzegovina taking part for the first time. In May 1993, the Bosnian War had been going for over a year, and their representatives, the group Fazla, had to leave Sarajevo under gunfire to get to Eurovision. Their conductor was meant to travel after them, but by the time he came to travel, it was impossible to get out, and he couldn't get to Millstreet in time. So, Irish conductor Noel Keelahan ended up standing in for him. Also, completely apart from the backdrop of war for one of its newest entrants, this was arguably the first Eurovision that had a real sense of jeopardy about it. It's not explicitly stated in the show itself, but due to the increasing number of countries wanting to take part, this is the first Eurovision to use a relegation system, where the year's least successful countries will not be allowed to take part the following year. I can't speak for broadcasters around the world, but UK commentator Terry Wogan did mention it several times, although he seemed to slightly misunderstand the concept because every time he talked about the bottom 6 countries being relegated, when it was in fact due to be the bottom 7. And he kept talking about how this was a good thing, because 25 countries was too many for one contest, seemingly not realise that those spots were due to be filled by other countries who weren't taking part this year. As it happened, 6 countries were indeed relegated: Belgium, Israel, Slovenia, Denmark, Turkey and Luxembourg. Initially, Cyprus were to be relegated too, but Italy declined to return in 1994 of their own volition, allowing Cyprus a reprieve. 1993 was, incidentally, also the last time we saw Luxembourg at Eurovision until they returned for the 2024 contest, as they decided against returning it in 1995, following their relegation year. While relegation from Eurovision for 1 year might not seem like a big deal, this was the first time it had happened, so it did carry a degree of shame for anyone who was unfortunate enough to be subjected to it. It was particularly tragic for Denmark, represented by Seebach Band with Under Stjernerne på himlen, or Under the Stars of the Sky, which singer Tommy Seebach wrote as a lullaby for his daughter. Denmark received only 9 points in this year's contest and were not allowed to participate in 1994. The Danish media placed a lot of the blame for this on Tommy Seebach himself, which he took very personally and reportedly caused him to relapse into alcoholism. As for the participants, there are a few noteworthy names and faces in there. Representing Germany this year, we have Münchener Freiheit, who had scored an international English-language hit in 1988 with Keeping the Dream Alive. But perhaps most consequentially for a certain element of the fandom, representing Belgium was Barbara with Iemand als jij, or No One But You. That's right, this is your one and only Barbara Dex, the inspiration for the Barbara Dex Award, which used to be awarded to the worst dressed act at Eurovision until 2022, after receiving criticism for being needlessly negative and borderline cruel, at which point it was replaced by the You're a Vision Award for the most original and dynamic outfit. Anyway, while I will say that Barbara's ensemble for this year's proceedings, a sheer gold, semi-transparent dress that she made herself, is maybe not a particularly flattering look, I'm not at all sure she was the worst dressed contestant of the night. I mean, did you not see those hideous blazers that the guys from Sweden were wearing? Or the garish green jacket the guy from Malta had on? Justice for Barbara, honestly. So, what about the songs? After all, we can sit here and talk about the geopolitical backdrop of this contest until the cows come home, but ultimately the music was what everyone turned up for, and the standards were, on the whole, pretty decent. Some of the standout tracks for me were Switzerland's Moi Tout Simplement by Canadian singer Annie Cotton, with Switzerland clearly hoping for a little bit more of that Celine Dion magic with this earwormy ballad, along with Austria's lively Maria Magdalena by Tony Vegas, Sweden's Alla Vingana with the extremely catchy Eloise, yes, despite the jackets, Norway's Silja Viga with the soft but haunting and dreamy Alla Mina Tanka, or All My Thoughts, and of course the night's 2 main contenders, Ireland's Niamh Kavanagh with In Your Eyes, and the United Kingdom's Sonia with Better the Devil You Know, both of which feel like peak Eurovision songs, but going in very different directions. And one of the joys of the strength of the field is that we're about to get an incredibly close round of voting that is going to keep us all on the edge of our seats in the final act of the show. But first, we have our interval entertainers. Ireland does keep it fairly traditional this year. Remember, we are still 1 year away from Riverdance changing the very concept of interval acts forever. So, Vanula invites Linda Martin back to perform last year's winning song Why Me Again. That track was of course written by Johnny Logan, making it his 3rd Eurovision win overall, so it would be remiss not to have him back as well. So Linda introduces Johnny back to the stage to perform the specially composed track Voices Are Calling, with a choir from the Cork School of Music and local kids from Millstreet, which is exactly as heartwarming as you'd expect. From there we're swiftly on to the voting, and it all gets quite chaotic in the opening rounds. Italy begin, and the United Kingdom get the very first point of the contest, while Ireland get the first 12 points. But it all flips on its head with the next set of votes from Turkey, with Ireland getting just 1 point, to murmurs of outright disgust from the audience, while Bosnia-Herzegovina get the 12 points and take the lead. Then, Germany give their 12 points to Switzerland, which puts Switzerland into first place. Switzerland are next to vote, and they put Ireland and Norway neck and neck at the front. But by the time we get to Belgium's voting, Norway have pulled out in front, and Switzerland are in second place. The United Kingdom gets its first of 3 consecutive sets of 12 points, and by the end of that, the United Kingdom are now winning. From that point onwards, it's pretty much a 2-horse race between Ireland and the United Kingdom, with the United Kingdom in the lead for a sizable chunk of it, until we get to the votes of the UK jury, where we give Ireland the full 12 points, which, as Fanula points out, really doesn't do us any favours because it means that Ireland are now in the lead by 4 points and, spoiler alert, they remain ahead for the rest of the voting. Overall, it is a pretty smooth voting process, but there are 3 points that stand out. The first is that there are some communication problems getting hold of the Maltese jury, meaning that Vanula has to skip right past them and go back to them at the end, where they end up ultimately having the casting votes in the contest. The second is the huge outpouring of support in the room when Vanula makes contact with the jury from Bosnia-Herzegovina. The connection isn't great and there's a shrill ringing sound on the line, but the fact that they've managed to carry out their voting from a war zone does not go unnoticed or unappreciated by the studio audience, and it is a genuine moment of empathy across international borders, one of the things that has always been a strength of Eurovision. And the third moment is slightly more of the comic relief variety, because during the voting from the Netherlands jury, Vanula briefly forgets where she is and miscounts the jury's scores, thinking that Ireland have been given the 12 points when in fact they haven't.
Ireland. That puts them 10 points in the lead. 1 point, the United Kingdom was 11 points in the lead, now slipped back. 12 points behind Ireland.
Ireland,
Sorry,
10
Ireland,
points.
10 points,
Excuse
that
me, I
goes
got
back.
carried away.
There's a little partiality there. You can't blame the lady. It's not easy to stand there.
Ireland, 10 points. Irlande, 10 points.
That's right.
By the time we've had the results from Norway, the penultimate country to vote, it is on a knife edge, with Ireland 11 points ahead of the United Kingdom. It looks like Ireland have got it clinched. Indeed, for a moment, Terry Wogan thinks they've already won, until he does the sums and realises that it is still possible for the United Kingdom to win if Malta give us the 12 points and gives nothing to Ireland. Malta, I'm sure entirely unintentionally, managed to milk the drama of the whole thing by getting all the way to the 12 points without giving anything to Ireland or the United Kingdom. It is particularly funny when we get to the 10-point mark, and pretty much everyone in the audience is assuming that that has to go to either Ireland or the UK, only for Malta to award their 10 points to Luxembourg, who, prior to that moment, had only earned a single point all evening. Even Terry Wogan practically burst out laughing.
Luxembourg?
Luxembourg.
So it all depends on who gets the last 12 points of the competition.
Okay.
And finally, Ireland.
Oh, that's it. It could have gone to us. It could have gone to the UK. It went to Ireland.
As it turns out, the Maltese jury had nothing for the UK and gave 12 points to Ireland, meaning that Niamh Kavanagh wins with a 23-point margin over Sonia. And to her immense credit, Sonia is the first of the other contestants to rush over and congratulate Niamh on her win. Terry Wogan, meanwhile, does get a little bit carried away, thinking that this is the first time any country has pulled off back-to-back wins. In fact, it's the fourth, after Spain in 1968 and 1969, Luxembourg in 1972 and 1973, and Israel in 1978 and 1979. I suppose I can forgive Terry not knowing Spain because that was before his time, and the second one was the infamous four-way tie after all. And I can forgive him not knowing Israel because he did take 1979 off commentating on the contest, but he was definitely commentating for BBC One when Luxembourg netted their second consecutive win in 1973, so you would have thought that would have rung a bell somewhere. Anyway, we're left with Ireland winning for the second year in a row, a reprise from Niamh Kavanagh, and while the show doesn't announce as much, rightly so, because it would be a bit of a bummer to close the show with this, the prospect of Belgium, Israel, Slovenia, Denmark, Turkey, Luxembourg and Cyprus not being invited out to play next year, though, as we've previously established, Cyprus will be back in 1994 thanks to Italy. And that wraps up a Eurovision that was momentous on a number of levels, for featuring the first pre-qualifying round, for extending the borders of the contest further into Eastern Europe and starting to shape what the contest would go on to become, and of course being the biggest Eurovision up to that point in time while being staged in the smallest town that ever hosted the contest. Eurovision 1993, a contest that was frankly better than it had any right to be. That's all from me for now. All being well, I'll be back in 2 weeks with our next episode. If you enjoyed this one, please do hit subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, or, even better, leave us a lovely review if you feel that way inclined. You can follow us on Twitter at bingewatch_pod or at Stephen Perkins to keep updated with the latest from us and from our sister pod Bingewatch. Until next time, good night Europe and good morning Australia.